Hey there! Welcome to the second sub-part of Database First Approach. In the last part, we created the database and tables for our solution. In case you didn't watch it, now is the time, as it will help you for better understanding. Alright, this is where we left off last time. And now we'll proceed with the next steps to load this EMS database into the solution. Okay, to do that, the first step again is to install the required NuGet packages. So we'll start with this. Right now we have two options. We can either install all the required NuGet packages in the common layer or in the repositories. We can actually install all the packages in the common layer, but since all these packages are very specific to the repository layer, I'll prefer to install in repositories layer instead. So let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so right click and click on manage NuGet packages. This will open up the NuGet packages for only the repository layer as you see here. And let's start with basic one, Microsoft.entity. Okay, so I'm spelling it wrong. Framework 4, this is the one. Select this, and if you notice, the latest stable version says 6.0.5, but we cannot download this. The reason being, the version for our solution is 3.1. Let me actually show you that. In the employee management system, the API layer, right click and select on properties. If you notice, the target framework will be .NET Core 3.1, and in here we are getting the option for 6.0.5, but still we cannot download this. We'll have future videos to update the first version from the current to the latest one further in this playlist. Let's proceed right now with the database approach. Alright, let's scroll down. Since we have the version 3.1, we have to select the version for this pack in either of the three versions, right? So the latest for 3.1 is 3.1.25. I'll select this, I'll click on install, and let's quickly let NuGet package install this. I'll click on I accept. Okay, now I believe that should be done. Yes, it is. Let's go ahead and go for the next one. The next one is Microsoft.entityFramework4.tools. We already have it here. Let's select, again it's the same thing, we cannot select the 6 version. We have to go for our current version, it's 3.1.25. We'll install it quickly, click on OK, I accept. So this tools package will actually help us to run multiple commands like scaffold or add migration and all this stuff. We'll learn about this in a minute. Okay, the next package is Microsoft.entityFramework4. The database name. So if we were using MySQL, we would have wrote MySQL. Since we are using SQL Server right now, we will instead write SQL Server, and it's already here. Let's search for this. Select this. Again, choose the right version. Latest for 3 is 0.1.25. Install it. Click on OK. Click on I accept, and that's it. So we are done with installations of these three packages. So the next one is Microsoft Entity Framework Code proxies. We are going to use this post we have ran the Scaffold-DbContext line. So it's the same as of the previous three packages. We have to install the current version of our .NET Core. So this is the one. I'll click on install. Click on OK. Click on I accept. And that's it. The package got installed. Okay. So the fifth and the final one is Microsoft Entity Framework Code Design. This is purely optional, particularly in this case, because we have installed all the packages in the repositories layer. Let's say if we had installed all the packages in the common layer instead of repositories, in that case we had to install this package. Since we installed all of them in the repositories layer, we are good here. Alright, let's move into the next part. We have reached the most important part of this video, scaffolding. So what is scaffolding? Scaffolding is basically writing down the database tables into a readable format inside the code, basically into a model. Well, how it looks like, we'll get to know that right now. So how do we start with scaffolding? The first thing to do is open up the package manager console, and these are the different ways to open it. I prefer the second one, using tools NuGet package manager. Once we have opened the package manager console, the next step will be to set up the startup project as repositories layer. You might ask why. We will get to know that in a minute.
अबे जल्दी बोल, कल सुबह पनवेल निकलना है.
The third step is to set up the default project as repositories layer in the package manager console. Okay, now that we have opened the package manager console and set up the default and startup project into repositories layer, the final part will be to run a line which comes from Microsoft.entity-framework-code.tools, and this is what we are going to use. This is the line Scaffold-DbContext. It has multiple parameters, starting with the first one, connection. This is the connection string from which it will read all the tables. The next is the provider, what type of database basically. It can be SQL Server, it can be MySQL, etc. etc. The third part is the output directory. We need to provide a folder name, and all the tables that will be converted into models will eventually be there in the output directory name we mentioned. The next part is context directory. Just like output directory, we have an option to provide context directory name as well. The context file will get created inside the context directory if we provide the name. The next one is context. We can provide a name for the context, and the context file that will get created will have the same name that we mentioned. There are many other options, schemas, tables, data annotations. The list goes on and on. You can read about all the options mentioned here just by entering this line in the package manager console. Alright, now that we know what needs to be done, let's go to the code and run this line. Alright, so the first thing I will do is searching this particular line. I'll click on enter now, and as you see, we have a lot of information provided here. So starting from the very top, we have the syntax, a proper syntax, we have the description, we have all the parameters mentioned here and all the details related to that. For example, connection. Connection is the connection string to the database, just like we discussed. Provider is the provider we are going to use, for example this one, SQL Server, and just like that the list goes on. You can read about it yourself. What I'm going to do now is running the Scaffold-DbContext line. So I have it here, let me copy this first. Alright, let's paste it here, and before I click on enter, I want to go through this line one more time. We have the Scaffold-DbContext line here. This is the connection string, this is the provider, this is the output directory folder name, this is the context directory folder name, this is the context file name, and -f or -f means force. This will basically help us in cases when you already have entities and the database context folder mentioned in the code base already. If you run this scaffold line without -f, it will throw you an error saying the database context and the entities folder already exist. That is where we need the -f or force, which will make sure it updates the current folders with new changes if there are any. Okay, let's click on enter now. So the build is started. The build should end soon. Yeah, there it is. The build has succeeded. Yeah, so there it is. The scaffolding was successful. Okay, now let's go through it once. We have the entities folder, and as mentioned, we have all the models here. Let's open up competencies. Let's go through it once. So we have ID, name, created on, updated on, and then we have an I collection of employees. Let's talk about that in a minute. Then we have departments. The same for departments, ID, name, created on, updated on. The same thing here as well, I collection of employees. Now let's go inside employees, and in here we have ID, name, date of birth, email, date of joining, basically all the columns that we mentioned in the table. Also, if you notice, the created on and the updated on are nullable date times, just like we had in the tables. Okay, now let's discuss about this virtual competencies and the I collection of employees. So when we designed our database, at that point of time, we created the employees table to have one competency and one department ID, right? One employee can have only one competency attached to it, the same for department as well. But when we go to departments or competencies, it says I collection of employees. Let's assume we have a department called HR. This particular department can have multiple employees inside it, right? And that is why you see this I collection of employees. Alright, now that we have the database context and the entities folder ready, let's update the employee repository code to make sure the changes are working fine. We don't need this variable anymore. So what I will do is I'll remove this part, employee list. That will give me loads of errors. And instead I'll create a new variable. We will make it private. We'll assign it read only so that nobody can modify it. Next we'll add the file name EMS context. Let's add the using statement. I'll click on enter. And finally let's name the variable context. Now let's open up a new constructor to assign the variable a new instance of EMS context. Alright. Okay, so public employee repository. I'll say EMS context and let's name it EMS context. Inside the constructor, I'll assign context is equals to EMS context. Okay, now in here, instead of saying employee list, this time we'll say context dot employees. Okay, so now we see a new error when we return back the employee. Well, yeah, there should be one because when we are saying context.employees, we are using the model employees here, but instead this is expecting the employee model from common.entities layer, right? So to make sure we are actually returning back a common entities employee, we have to do this instead. So select new, we have to say employee here, click on enter, open up the brackets, and then we have to assign everything manually. So in here we'll start with ID. Let's say e dot id. Let's fast forward this. And finally, for the last two variables, competency and department, we have to do this instead. So competency is equals to e dot competency dot name. Okay. This particular line will make sure that it goes inside the employee. It then goes inside the competency connected to this employee and then gets the name of that competency. Right. That's why we have added this. Alright, same for department, department.name. We have no use of competency or department ID here. Instead, we'll just take the names from the model direct. Alright, so that's the fix for only one part, get employee by ID. We can do the same, of course, for employee list. Let's do that quickly as well. Okay, and in here, we'll say e.id, e.name, e.name. Okay, that's it. The problem is resolved automatically. Superb. We can fix this as well. Context dot employees. In here we make sure we check that, and here we'll just simply copy this part. Okay, yeah, we have fixed three functions. Now we are left with create, update and delete. Alright, so for the create employees we can do this instead, context.employees. So we can say context.employees. In here we don't need this anymore. If you remember, we had made sure the ID column is an identity one, so we don't need to increment the ID anymore. We'll remove this code, and in here instead of saying employee list, we'll say context.employees. Now here we can either say add or we can say add async. Since it's a synchronous function, I will click on add. If we had used add async, we had to do it like this. We had to make sure this function is async, and in here we had to make sure the add async call is awaited. But yeah, since CreateEmployee is not an asynchronous function, we'll simply remove the await async keywords. Now it's a synchronous function again. Okay, we get an error here saying, alright, yeah, so it's the same problem again. We have to make sure we do this change. So let's do it quickly. I'll say where new employee is equals to new employee, and this time I have to select the correct model. This is not the right one, common.entities. Alright, so what I will do instead is hover over this, select on this entity, and I'll create the namespace. I'll copy this, go to the top, say using, and then I'll assign this particular namespace into a variable. So I'll say employee DL as in data layer, or we can say repositories, anything. I'll paste this, and then I have to select the particular model. So I'll say dot employees. Okay, Now let's copy this and scroll to the bottom. So in here, instead of saying new employee, which is from the common layer, I'll use employee DL. And if I hover over this, you will see it is coming from the repository layer. Alright, let's move to the next part. We'll assign values to it. I'll copy this part, team email, because we don't need competency and department. I'll paste it here. Alright, just notice this. Let's fix this as well. Instead of saying employee in every single place here, let me rename this to E, and it is getting used here. I'll use it here as well, and this should work. Yes, okay. So now I can copy this, I can add it here, but we are not done with CreateEmployee yet. We have added all the properties except for the competency ID and the department ID. We need to get that from somewhere, right? Right now, this employee model coming from common layer is giving the department as a string and competency as a string, not an integer, right? We need to make sure it's an integer. So we have to do this change no matter what. What we can do here is we can simply add two more properties. We can say int and then say department ID. The same for competency ID. Okay, this is an option. We can do this, or there is another alternative. In the common layer, in the entities folder, inside the DTOs folder, we had the employee model and the employee list DTO, right? Here we can create a new model saying create employee, and then just simply copy all the things and remove these two properties. That will also work. So once we do that, once we create that model, we have to make sure we create employee function from every single layer, from API, from services, from repositories, uses the create employee model and not the employee. I leave this work up to you. You can try that. If you face any problems, you are free to comment as always. Okay, so let's reuse this employee model only. I will add up the competency and the department ID. So let's do this, and for department we'll say e dot department ID. All right. So now you might be thinking create employee is done, but it's not done yet. Once we have added the new employee in the employee statement, okay, this should be add and not add a sync. Okay, yeah. So once we have added the new employee, you would be expecting the employee to get saved in the database, but no, that's not how the context file works. You have to write this line specifically, context.save changes. You have an option for both synchronous and asynchronous. I'll select the synchronous one. Once you use the save changes method from context, the changes will get reflected in the database. Just an FYI, the save changes returns back an integer value. This represents the number of records inserted in the database. If in case you need this for something, you know how to use it right now. Alright, so that's pretty much for the create employee. Let's go to the next part, update employee. So in here I'll say context.employees, and that should work. Yeah, as expected. Right now the competency is not string anymore, it's a model instead. So in here we have to say ID. The same for here, ID. Same here, not department, instead department ID. And same here as well, department ID. Alright. We did update all the properties for this wallet employee to be updated. But here is the catch. This update won't affect in the database, since we haven't used the line context.save changes. Every time we update the database, we have to make sure we run this line. Only after that, the changes will occur in the database. Alright, let's write context.save changes here. And that's it. We have fixed the update employee as well. Alright, let's go into the next one, delete employee. So it's very straightforward. Alright, we already know what needs to be done. Instead of employee list, we need to say context.employees. The same here, context.employees. And just as we discussed, we need to make sure the context.save changes is written, or else the employee won't get deleted from the database. Alright, we are done with the changes for the repository. But tell me one thing. we used EMS context in the constructor here, right? I'm assuming you know what dependency injection is. If not, you can watch my video here. So how will this EMS context pop up? We haven't added anything in the starter file, right? So that's the last part we have to do to make sure all the changes related to the context file are actually working. Alright, let's go to the starter file. The first assumption that comes in the mind while we talk about dependency injection is either of the three lifetime methods: transient, scope, and singleton. But that's not the case for database context. We have to use a separate function called services.add_DbContext. This comes from the package Microsoft Entity Framework 4, and we have to provide the file type for this function with the DbContext option built. Alright, so our type will be EMS context, which is there in the database context, this one. Let's add the using statement, and we open up the brackets. We say options as the variable name for our anonymous function. Open up the brackets to make it a proper anonymous function, and then say options.useSQLServer. We'll click on control dot to add the using statement from Microsoft Entity Framework 4, and here we have to provide the connection string. The connection string is basically the string that we use to connect to the database. If you open up the EMS context in the onConfiguring method, you will find this line options.useSQLServer and then the hard-coded connection string, right? You can simply copy that and use the hard-coded string here, or you can keep the connection string into a separate place where all the hard-coded strings for the application will be there. The name is AppSettings.json. If you don't know about it, we're going to make a video on AppSettings in the future for this playlist. Make sure you check it out. For now, just understand AppSettings normally has information which is in a key value pair. For example, this one. The first is the key and the second part is the value. The same for this one. This is a key. The value is this, an object. Inside the object, again, you have a key, and again you have an object, again a key which has a value information. The objects are basically the values for the keys, right? The same way, we can create a key value pair for connection strings, and this is a recognized key value pair from Microsoft. All you have to do is create a key value pair inside this connection strings object. I'm going to name this key value pair as EMS database, and inside this I'm going to paste the connection string we copied from the context file. Alright, and now in the starter class, instead of the hard-coded string, I'm going to say configuration. The configuration variable helps us connect to the AppSettings file. We're going to say configuration dot get connection string, and then we're going to name the connection string. Inside that, of course, the same we mentioned here, this one. Close it. Unlike the connection strings object, which has a specific function get connection string, for other objects you don't say get logging or that particular variable name. Instead, you have to say get section, and then you have to name the section inside. For example, this one, logging, and then again you can access the log level, and this goes on. We will learn about this in the future video as we discussed right now. For now, let me remove this part and again put the older one. Okay. After adding the connection string, we'll add one more line, options.UseLazyLoadingProxies. It takes a boolean input inside. I will provide the value true here. What does this do? Well, for that, let's go inside the repository file. So in cases like this, GetEmployeeByName, in here we are saying employee.competency. If I open up the DB set or the model, this is the model which is technically connected to the DB set of the context. This one. This one. When we say use lazy loading proxies, we basically say don't load up the competencies value or the department's value for this particular employee until and unless we use it. So, for example, we did say e.competency.name. At that point of time, link queue will go and look for the connected competency for this employee. Until we use this variable, the data won't be loaded up in the application memory. This is how this function use lazy loading proxies helps us to not slow down the application. Alright, now that we are done with the startup changes as well, let's build the solution now. Oh, I forgot. I need to make sure the startup project is API solution. So I'll right click here. I'll click on Set a Startup Project. This will make sure the API is running. Let's click here now to run the solution. Alright, the solution is running now. I have the Postman ready with all the endpoints to be called. Let's start with the GetEmployee first. I'll click on Send and I get an error. What is it? So dbSetEmployees.where is causing a problem which is saying comparison type ordinal ignore case could not be translated. I have gone through this error in the past and had read about it in the internet. This is the link which I found in the internet. You can also go through it. It will be there in the description box. Basically what it means is the way we can use ordinal ignore case when using an in-memory collection like a list or iList or collection. The same cannot be done using LINQ. We can either say e.name.equals name, just that, and not the second parameter. If you provide the second parameter, the LINQ will keep on throwing errors like this. So instead, I can remove this code. Let me stop the solution. Instead of using the full weight, let's use the legacy method, the older one, dot to lower, which will make sure the value for the string is in lowercase for both the properties we are checking. Alright, let's build the application again and run the solution. This time I'll click on F5 to run the solution and hope all the endpoints will work properly. We are of course not going to check all the endpoints, just one or two endpoints. Let's say for get and create, and we'll hope everything works perfectly fine. Alright, open up the Postman again, click on send and wait for the data to show. Alright, there it is. We're able to fetch the information for Sai and Shah. The ID, the name, the date of birth, and all the information. The reason we're not able to get the ID for department and competency is because we haven't saved the information in here. If we would have said department ID is equals e dot department dot ID, the same for competency, e dot competency dot ID, and if we had restarted the application and checked again, we would have got the department and the competency ID. Awesome. Let's try one more get. This is for getting an employee by its ID. Let's click on send. I should be able to get all the information. Again, these two are not set. For the endpoint, yeah, of course, I don't see the properties. You can set it yourself now. Let's try the final endpoint to create a new employee. Alright. I don't need to provide the ID anymore. I'll remove it. For name, I'll say, I don't know your name. So I'm going to say loving viewer. Let's keep the other information same as it is and click on send. Alright, we get an error and this makes sense. We didn't provide the competency and the department ID while saving the employee, that is you. Let's leave the cursor from here and we have all the information. The error which we got, let's provide the competency and the department ID. We don't need these two variables anymore as we are not going to use these variables anymore. Instead of department, I have named it department ID and I will give the value 1. Same for competency. I'll remove the string and provide 1 as the value. And let's click on send now. We get a true response. That means the employee got created. We could have shared back the inserted employee details. Well, that's an option too. And it's very easy to do that. All we have to do is return back the employee we got as an input. Alright, let's check if we have the information now in the database. I'll open up the database. Let's run the query. We had 5 rows in the employees table and the 6th one should be ours, the one we just now inserted. And yes, that's right. We do see the loving viewer employee here with all the information. I forgot to add the properties created on and updated on while inserting the employee, hence we don't see the information here. But yeah, we do see the employee, right? And that's great. We have finally connected the application to a SQL Server database using database first approach. In the next video, we will discuss how we can create a database from the application using code first approach. That's it for this video. If you like this video, please click on the like button. If you want to support us, please click on the subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye bye.